Hello, and welcome to Caplin Connects, the podcast where we talk about single dealer platforms, trading technology, and everything in between. I'm John Ashworth. In each episode, we'll dive into the trends, tools, and talent shaping the future of electronic trading. Join me as we unpack what's new and what's next. I'm joined this week by Graham Moss, Global Head of FX IT at BBVA. Graham's a person of great interest, having begun his career at TR, focusing on what was then called RET and working with TRDA. Amazing brands operating really as one-eyed monsters in the land of the blind. Interesting times from a technology point of view. Having worked for Thomson Reuters with a number of banks, he then went to work for a number of banks, and most recently BBVA, which has a strong Spanish, European and Latin American franchise. He's also a wine merchant, therefore has a hinterland, and is to be treated with great respect, not just because, for full disclosure, he's a Caplin client, but also a martial arts instructor. Graham, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
I thought we'd start by taking you back to the beginning and the time you had at Thomson Reuters and RET. Firstly, how did you get into it? And then looking back, what stands out, knowing what you now know?
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I was very wet behind the ears when I joined. I joined, some of my ex-colleagues remind me, I joined the day the Thomson acquisition of Reuters was announced. So 2007, more or less, I think, pre-crisis. So everybody was living the dream and it was all very new. I was a technologist. I've always been a technologist, a geek through and through. And for me, it was a kind of slow introduction. Some wonderful people there. And as you start to build up your knowledge, you start to see, as you said, the success. They had a significant franchise, a lot of customers. They had white labeling options, and some super complex solutions. At that time, they had tier one banks. Tier one banks were using the product because they didn't have their own. These things appear to go in waves, and I joined at a time where they were very much on their way up, and they had some big names that were supporting their growth.
You're painting a picture where the sales process was answering the phone, and that banks knew they had to get into this space.
I'm sure that there were some salespeople that would disagree, and they did a huge amount of work. But it's true that, as you said, I don't really feel like there was many other options out there, to be honest.
Were there any banks trying to do it for themselves?
I think that, and this is the case now as well, right? You go through this period within the banking world, as far as I can see, is saying all these problems we have with these vendors, we can do it better in-house. We're always waiting, nothing works. So you bring it in, and then things start to not quite do what you expect. And, you're not actually a tech company, and you're actually a bank, and things take the time, and then you go out again. So, but I think there were some absolutely that were doing it. I've worked at this place as well, but other places that have had that. Because there's a whole ecosystem around it. It still exists around individuals who have had experience working with that product. And I know most of them, right, because they went out into the banking sector and deployed their expertise in the banks.
Did the banks know what they were doing then? Or were you guiding them?
Depending on the size, the tier ones and twos, absolutely. I wouldn't even say it was a partnership in many cases. It was, especially in areas outside of the kind of very vanilla FX product space, they were guiding us. But the smaller 2, 3s, it was very much, how do you does this? Oh, great. There's some of these places, they, with all due respect, it just didn't have the exposure.
Yes.
And so in those cases, it was, you can look at this particular element. And by the way, that can generate additional revenues, etc. Here's an opportunity, So, yeah, I think it was a bit of both. It's true that the history, AVT Technologies was, the story, but was acquired by Reuters, and they brought a lot to the table. And I think a lot of I'll refer to them as the giants of AVT space, were a big part in the success of that franchise within Reuters and then Thomson Reuters.
So we're painting a picture here of a need being fulfilled by a very relevant technology that had been finely engineered. What about the sort of political and business background in the banks? What were the challenges there getting this stuff installed? Because I presume there were still voice desks that resisted.
I think it was still very new, right?
Did they know what they were doing and why they were doing it?
I think probably, I don't know. I would say I didn't have a front row seat from the banking side. I was the vendor at that point, and certainly on the technology side rather than the business. My understanding, because one of the big pieces referred to as an auto trader, it was novel and a big selling point for the product. Super simple, but the idea that you automatically price and actually complete a trade was something that was, at least as far as I'm aware, innovative at the time. The idea that you didn't actually need it. You could think about your customer types and the sort of pricing profiles that you want for your sales guys ahead of time. and then commit to it was pretty novel. So, I mean, you've seen as well as I have the number of voice traders in the banks is smaller and smaller and smaller. We're a big franchise. We have very few voice traders, even in our biggest markets. So I do still, as I said, I do still think that there's a need for them. There's a talent there, but you're not managing the whole flow anymore. It's just dealing with the bits and pieces. That's the view I have, which is a challenge, of course.
What was the principal use case for the auto trading to start with?
I think it's like all automation, in my view at least, and this is sometimes it's a sales piece as well to the humans in the loop. But ultimately, we're going to concentrate on the bits and pieces, the low risk items. We know these counterparties are either pre or post credit check. There's no issue. And give our voice guys the time to focus on the big ticket items, right? The larger flows. I do remember there wasn't a customer of ours we were trying to sell to them. I remember going to a London bank, Canary Wharf, and to their trading floor and seeing, this is the first time I saw a voice desk managing a yard in like 10, 15 seconds between 4 or 5 of them. It was incredible. I was really taken aback, and you saw the value at that time. And the challenge, of course, is with Algorithmic, and TRDA was a big part of that. When Thomson Reuters bought Agersoft, then acquired a product that was more focused on the algorithmic side. And that meant that even this incredible feat of seeing humans manage it becomes less and less needed, because why do I need people to do that when an algo can manage it for me and probably more efficiently?
So as we put it earlier, we're talking about the pre-financial crash. So these are halcyon days. Every summer had cloudless blue skies. But looking back, what was challenging, either from a technology point of view or an implementation point of view?
I mean, sometimes there's this idea that all banks look the same, but they're not. I mean, to give you an idea, this is the first time I've worked in a Spanish entity, and it's not a trade secret. It's very well known that they do not have a COO office in any of the Spanish banks, as far as I'm aware. And, talking about RET as a product, you've got your tier ones covered, some tier twos say no thank you. You start to move down into tier threes, and you start to move outside of the UK. You move into other geographies, of course, expand out, America, blah, 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 conquer the world. Not all banks are made the same. Sometimes, I mean, this is the kind of growing pains, right, of any sort of successful enterprise, is that, okay, it's not one size fits all. This isn't a retail play. We're talking about people with specific needs. As something that I know that LSEG, Thomson Reuters became, at least that element of it, we're still dealing with in terms of a challenge, right, is how you need to be able to scale this model. So for me, from a vendor side, I think it's always going to be the challenge, right? You know this in your world, right? With Caplin, a vendor has to try and meet the needs of the customer, but at the same time, you've got 5 customers with 5 different views, and yes, they're all right, and yes, they're all important customers paying the bills. So for me, I think there's something that's not necessarily an element of the time itself, but there's something that sticks out to me from the vendor side, at least, as being the biggest challenge.
And what was the fact that RET had its position in the market then spawned other vendors to come and do specialist pieces of the stack? Caplin obviously benefited from that, but other vendors did as well. It seemed to be an emergence of specialist aggregators, specialist rate engine providers, and so on. Which were the ones that you think made most progress and took most advantage of that?
There was a period when Apama was everywhere, right? Yeah. They had a hint, BBVA, for example. I don't think that's a trade secret. It's entering history now. I think the aggregators in general, there was an opportunity, and it comes back to the history story, right? Of how we're moving from voice into automated, into algorithmic, where you can maximize your P&L, then that's something that can be sold. Yes, there were definitely vendors that suddenly, I wouldn't say fed off the success, but it was clear that there was an opportunity there. But as I said, I feel as though there was this kind of organism around the product in terms of specialists and in terms of, I can tell you how to improve X, Y, Z. I remember having an interview for an Italian bank at one point, which I won't name, and they said, RET do reasonably well, I think, yeah. Can you rebuild this? I want you to rebuild this. How does it work? What does it do? And so even the banks were looking to try and emulate the success. They were trying to find people out in the market that had that experience. So I guess rather than it just being vendors, I feel like there's this, as I said, this whole ecosystem that was kind of spawned out of it. FX, for example, the technology that underlies FX always the same.
Exactly.
We can talk about the decision to acquire something that you already owned from a technology perspective, but that was obviously then acquired by Thomson Reuters later on, but the same tech, exactly the same.
Now, you were serving the banks who were your customers, but what about the customers' customers? What do they think about all this? Were they excited to have this technology foisted on them, or?
I think that there were probably two cases, right? Somewhere I have an app that I can log into, and that's innovative, that makes life easy, gives me more control. I'm doubtful if they were quite aware of how much this was about maximizing returns for the provider. Of course, there's a service to provide there. I mean, I'm giving you access to liquidity, but personally, I wasn't really that exposed to end users. I know that it was a big thing, right? So having a white label opportunity, being able to stick your brand on this out-of-the-box, inverted commas, product is obviously an advantage for the bank. And I suppose you could argue as well that it's a more efficient system for those end users, right?
Yes.
And no longer you need the voice element. So I can give you much better prices if you're using the e-flow instead, the e-channel instead. So I don't know. It's difficult because my perspective has always been about powering the customer, and to be brutal, it's about maximizing the returns and minimizing the risk on these trades. That's what it comes down to.
Anyway, what a brilliant place to start. You then had a number of gigs with different banks. Tell us a little bit about what you learned there that you wish you'd known earlier on, and other experiences that you picked up.
I mean, it's great going to trading floors. I really love trading floors. I'm not somebody who, I think if anybody knew me before this, it doesn't strike me as him, but I love it. Like the energy, there's a kind of a playfulness, I guess, about a trading floor. Yes.
Did that ever inspire you to want to be a trader?
No, because I don't have the qualifications. To be clear, I mean, I think every other person who's had some exposure to FX thinks that they can be an FX trader, but I don't know. I guess my point of view is that experts should be experts with training and history. And yeah, maybe you can drift into it if you're fortunate enough and gifted enough. But no, it's never really been for me. But I do feel as though the stress, it can be a bonding element. And so that's something that I wish I had been more exposed to. I understand when you're just starting out in your career, perhaps from a vendor perspective, you don't want to throw people out onto the trading floor straight away. You're going to make some kind of mistake. But for me, that's how you actually learn what's going on. Like, how does it operate? Conceptually, the unit in Thomson Reuters was sales and trading. It was just words to me when I was first starting out. And only when you get there and you see how a bank works from an FX perspective, not only FX and other desks as well.
Yeah, you strike me as having the character of not just observing what was going on that the traders were doing, even though you didn't feel you could do it yourself, but actually you'd probably hang out with them and have a beer with them. And then you get a sense of what the actual workflow was.
Right.
And what the actual structures were and what the imperatives were.
It's something that I think Spain is a fantastic place and I'm loving working here, but it is something that's very different. The culture within the London banking space, and I suspect also within the US as well, of post-work drinks and discussing improvements and stuff, and some of it's work and some of it's banter. That's not really that present here.
But you're on a very splendid
The campus is incredible.
But it is a campus.
It is a campus. It is incredible space, but it does mean, you can't just roll out to a bar. And to be honest, it's not really in the Spanish culture anyway, from my understanding. But I would love to, and always did this, right? You go out and you have some fun. And yes, actually, you also learn about the business as well, and you understand how things work, and people have opinions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Networking is clearly an element too. So yeah, I mean, and I think that's an important part of being my role, I think. Being successful in that is being able to bridge. As I said at the beginning, I'm a geek. I'm absolutely a geek. But that doesn't mean I can't go and have a beer and talk about things that aren't just engineering, right?
But there are a lot of geeks in development and lots of geeks in business analysis.
Yeah, that's true.
So how can they do their job if they're not mixing it with the traders and the salespeople?
Yeah, I think you absolutely have to, right? We don't have a choice. I mean, I think the best BAs are ones that are bridging the gap, right? They need to be able to talk both languages and enjoy it. Inherently, I think that's the difference between someone who's successful or not. Yeah. In my space, which bridges the business and the technology, is that you genuinely need to be interested in both sides. And to be honest, if I think about the people you work with, some of them, those people who are very successful are exactly that. They actually do enjoy both elements, which is kind of self-explanatory, I suppose.
Getting back to your early days of RET, it's now 2025. If we very crudely split the whole ecosystem into market data adapters, aggregation, call price formation, rate engine, UI, spreading, order management, what's changed most and what's best today? And is this stuff not all commoditized?
Yes, much of it is. I mean, certainly in terms of venue connectivity, 100%. Most of these connections are fixed. They're all in the same data center. Like from a technology perspective, it's the most sensible thing to commoditize. I think where I've seen, I mean, if we talk about timings, right? So auto traders in the RET world, we were talking about milliseconds maybe in terms of streams. When we were talking about streaming to humans, we're talking about seconds. The bigger providers out there now are very much in the microsecond space, right? They've moved into the kind of genuinely high frequency space, which wasn't the case for FX for quite some time. So commoditized, yes. Faster, absolutely.
Client demands, have they changed much? End client demands, I mean.
I wouldn't say so personally. I think for me, it's just more about digitization than anything else. And it's something that, seeing the brand for a moment, that BBVA has been focused on, is the digitization element. And it makes complete sense, right? I mean, if you've got isolated capital, something that's you're not connected into the machine, then you're losing an opportunity, right? So the product is so simple. I mean, yes, you do get some options, right? There are some obscurities, but most of the volume is done in the vanillas, right? And so we're not talking about something that's very complicated. That's difficult. I mean, so I guess in terms of streaming to customers, that's probably where I've seen the biggest change. I mean, executable streaming prices was relatively new back in the late noughties, early tens. You know, the concept of having a one-click price, what I see is what I get. So I think that across the board, the repackaging of the product to the end user has certainly improved and become more, I guess, the competition has driven that out of many of the banks, but it's just more of the same, faster. That's the feeling that I have. On the algorithmic side, I haven't seen much. You know, when Thomson Reuters acquired Agisoft, you know, there were the common algos that most places know and understand, VWAP, etc., icebergs, you know, but I haven't seen much of that. And probably I was there during the Night Capital incident. Do you remember that? I don't know how much they lost, but they lost a lot of money. And my understanding is that an algo went wrong. It was buying instead of selling, right? You know, the classic story. I think that the risks associated with highly complex algos has meant that it's a kind of a barrier and people don't really, of course, the tier one, tier twos, I'm sure they do some of the sophisticated stuff, but there's kind of a limitation in such a basic product on what you can do. Internalization, I suppose, is the best option.
How big a segment of your customer base are banks themselves? Smaller tier 3, tier 4 banks?
I'm not sure what I can disclose.
Some.
Yes.
Some. Well, less about the numbers and more about their demands. Do they think they need to run an FX stack themselves, or can you do that for them? Or
I mean, I think it's the same kind of story that the larger banks had previously, right? Which is, let's have a go. You try and maybe it doesn't work. I think tier 2, tier 3, you need to think very carefully if you want to do it in-house, because although the product is simple, if you want to do it well, then it's going to take a lot of time. It needs a huge amount of expertise. So I think, yeah, to a certain element is, okay, just hand this problem over to somebody else. So yeah, I mean, we do absolutely have institutional banking clients that rely on us for that product. But I think it's also about vicinity to the market as well, right? Because certainly in our case, we're a LATAM bank. Really, if you want to compete in this world, you need to be in London, New York, and Tokyo, maybe Singapore, depending on who you talk to. Yes. And so as a tier 2, 3, is that something that you can really do? Can you have presence? These aren't cheap data centers. You know, you need operational teams. You know, there's a big baseline running cost. So I think it's an important factor.
I'm slightly leading by witness because I'm surprised they still do.
Yeah.
I think
some feel bold enough, right? Maybe a certain amount of arrogance, perhaps.
Yeah, no. And franchise and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
You describe yourself deprecatingly and charmingly as a geek. What are the technologies?
And by the way, I wear it as a badge of honor.
No, clearly. No offense taken or intended at all. But what are the technologies that you're excited about today?
You know, it's interesting. Let's not talk about AI because this is front and center. But still using history, Java has been around forever, literally forever. I learned it at university. It still hasn't gone away. It's just, I mean, obviously, when it fell into hands that perhaps had deep pockets to support it as a technology, as Oracle owns it. But underlying technologies, there's not really huge change, right? Like languages have changed, of course. From a front-end perspective, you guys know that there are only 2 or 3 real flexible UI tools and UI frameworks that you can take advantage of. But there's some of these technologies that suggest that they might come Golang. I mean, there was something everyone was talking about for a bit and then just kind of didn't, I don't know. In the technology space, you need the critical mass. You need people who know this. Being brutal, if I meet someone who doesn't code Java, they're just going to cost 3 or 4 times. It's just economically doesn't make sense. And so everyone just keeps investing and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Front end stuff is slightly different, and then the elephant in the room, AI.
We got there. Hurrah.
Well, it's interesting. Like I've always been a skeptic.
Join the crowd.
Yeah. I had a privacy tech startup with an ex-colleague doing natural language processing in 2016. I'm definitely not an expert, but I had, through that and the work that we did there, I have some understanding. And so knowing that, I was very, very, very skeptical. But large language models, I mean, the great thing about BBVA is that they're very much invested in it as a solution. And I don't think you even necessarily need to dictate what it is, just knowing that it's going to do fantastic things if the right focus is put in, if smart people are put in the room with the right investment, ultimately. I think, yeah, it's super interesting. I was lucky enough to join a conversation with the chief scientist here at BBVA and purely focused on AI. And he was talking about this diamond standard that existed as of June last year. And if the large language models can crack this test, because obviously you need to be able to test the AI to understand how good it is. If they can crack this test, at least some kind of like professor, normally you would need to have studied a certain degree for X amount of time and very complex test. If we can crack that, then that's it, the game's over. And 9 months later, 12 months, it's done. And the view internally, but I think probably externally as well, is it's just about energy. Like they're building nuclear power plants in the US just to power AI.
Yeah.
Have you heard the Gartner hype curve?
Hype curve, yeah.
I think just about past the trough, and maybe now we're getting into kind of the realization of tangible benefits.
Yes, I've noticed I share some skepticism as you do, and I've published in other channels on this topic, so I won't repeat my thoughts here, other than to say I've noticed that some social media channels have actually got worse, not better, because the aggregate content of material that's being scraped is itself AI generated. Therefore, you get a sort of mean reversion to mediocrity. Yeah. On the other hand, it's unquestionably true that even within the last 6 months, we've gone from people being slightly coy about admitting they're using AI in their professional work to any extent on the basis that it's sort of cheating or the answer won't be very good or it's lazy, to, well, actually, if you're not using it, there's a question as to why you're not, because it could definitely enhance the productivity of a skilled expert, I would say.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Maybe we're moving into the social ethics here. I feel that already, because within the bank here, we have access to it. I feel already I have an advantage. There is an advantage. Let's leave aside conversations.
Advantage for you or advantage for the bank?
It depends, right? Because not everybody...
Or advantage for you as a member of society?
I think it's all three, all of the above, right? If you understand how the tool works, if you have a background in that area and you can see how you can apply it and where there are pitfalls and where not, that gives you... Last year, I had a conversation with one of the lead researchers here in the bank. I saw that she was using ChatGPT and she was like, it's like, I basically have a free research assistant right here. But that was a year ago. So now we're talking about deep research. That's a significant advantage. And one might argue, Wikipedia is something that's free for everyone. We're already moving into a space where this stuff is being commoditized, is being put behind a paywall. At what point do we start asking the question, well, actually, shouldn't everybody have access to this? I don't know. Maybe it's the socialist in me coming in. For the banks, they're all doing it. So you either do it or you lose.
Thrive or survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final question or final theme. Assuming you're still here in 3 years' time, you seem to be doing a fantastic job. I'm sure you will be. What would you like to have achieved by then? And how do you see the technology or the commercial landscape changing?
So we're going through a significant transition. Every bank has its nuances. And I mentioned before about the difference between the Spanish bank and the British bank. I don't think I'm bringing the better approach. I'm just bringing a different approach. My feeling is that I would hope that we could bring the best of both of those approaches. To be honest, for me, the technology is something that we're going to refine and improve, and I've no doubt that will be a success. I think probably, and this isn't just here in any place, right? But the key is about being efficient with what you're doing and ultimately referencing the AI element. If in 3 years' time, we don't have a platform that supports agentic calls to make decision-making and to make changes, then probably I failed, though, to be honest. We need to be ready for that, absolutely. And that's not necessarily delivering the results, but having a framework that supports that, I think is critical. It's every bank should be thinking about this, and I'm sure they are. So I think I would like to have achieved that for sure. We've got huge growth ambitions. I mean, there is an acquisition request happening at the moment, or attempt happening at the moment, whether that happens or not. Regardless, there's an aspiration there to grow as a bank. This consolidation of European banking is happening.
And will continue.
And will continue, absolutely.
Only the strong will survive.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to be part of that, right? I mean, that would be fantastic. And as I said, even if it's not what's currently planned, I still feel as though this BBVA in particular is, again, not to sound like the brand, but I do actually think that it's positioned really well in terms of Latin America, strength in Latin America. We've got a franchise in Turkey. There's some very interesting elements there. You could argue it's somewhat niche, but with global aspirations. We're growing in Asia. We now have presence in London. It's a big commitment for us as an entity. So I guess more than feeling like I should have achieved something, I'm just happy to be participating in what's kind of an exciting time.
Can you find the people you need to support this growth?
In London?
Or in the theatres of operation, really? I just wonder how good the kids are that are coming out of universities. And
it's challenging. Different generation, and I'm not going to be one of these people who say, well, this new generation, they work differently, and it's going to have its pluses and its minuses. And so, I mean, we're talking about GenAI, right? Not generative AI, but the generation that's grown up
with it.
With AI natively, right? Copilot as a coding assistant. That's a kind of how you approach your day-to-day job, right? Just as the voice traders had to learn to start managing flows in a different way, et cetera, and start to modernize. So developers are going to have to go through the same transition, and no longer is, I'm thinking about this capability, I need to write this, and this. Why would I do that? I just ask the AI agent to do it for me.
Are you developing with AI?
To start doing it. And
for production code or test cases? Or
I mean, look, there's always going to be improvements that need to happen. And I think each individual is going to go through their own journey. But yes, there are certain use cases that make more sense than others. I don't think there's any excuse for not having well-documented code anymore, because 20 seconds,
it's documented.
It's done. And maybe you need to review it, but I mean, come on, there's no excuse. So this, in theory, that should be make things more efficient. But coming back to the original question, these youngsters don't have to adjust their approach, right? I mean, maybe 2-3 years, we're talking to people who've gone through university learning these tools. I went through university learning Java, right? That was the new thing, Java 1.4, whenever it was. These guys are going to be, they're not even going to be so bothered about that. It's just tell it you want to do this and it will do it, and different challenges, right? So that's really exciting.
Well, exciting for the haves and challenging for the have-nots, I would suggest.
But it's a two-way street, isn't it, right? I mean, those long in tooth will hopefully be able to bring something to bear and say, look, okay, but did you see this and this? Experience is super important. But I would expect and hope that they can look over the shoulder of some of the junior guys and be like, I could do that. All right, you can do that. And we should be doing that, right? In every area of our world, every walk of life, we should be trying to improve, I think.
Well, that's a very optimistic note on which to leave things. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Graham, thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
good luck with your mission here, and I'm sure we'd love to get you back on the show at some point in the future when you've delivered on it. Thank you.
Appreciate the time. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning into Caplin Connects. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss what's next. If you'd like to learn more, head over to caplin.com and check out the team behind the show.